Hello! So I have wanted to talk about Mohsin Hamid's The Reluctant Fundamentalist for a long time, and I thought that now, since I am overwhelmed with research and work to do on various projects that have looming deadlines, that now would be the time to do it. So The Reluctant Fundamentalist opens in a cafe in Lahore, Pakistan, and it begins by a Pakistani man named Shangez engaging with an unnamed American character. So the whole novel is essentially a monologue given by Shangez to this unknown, unnamed, unvoiced American character, and it's through this monologue that we learn about Shangez's life. We learn that he's incredibly intelligent, and this earned him a spot to study at Princeton. We learn that he continued to live and work in the United States after graduation, having secured a prestigious, high-paying job in New York City. We learn that he meets an American woman and falls in love with her. And then we learn his personal reactions to 9/11 and the events that follow. So this novel was published in 2007, at the tail end of the Bush administration, and a time when arguably, I guess aside from maybe now, when fear of Islam and of Arab-appearing people was most rampant. So what this novel does is, to me, very interesting. It grants this Pakistani character complete control over the narrative, and it allows him to share his unique embodied experience of 9/11, US supremacy, anti-Islamic sentiment, without being silenced, without his voice being drowned out. Because as we know, the voices of these individuals have largely been silenced, particularly in post-9/11 discourse. So what this novel does is it gives that subject complete control over the narrative when otherwise that voice would have been silenced, and it also renders the American character completely voiceless, which of course again is the opposite of the way that it's actually happened here in the West, where the US has dominated that discourse. So the novel also does something else very interesting, and that has to do with the perspective that it's written in, second person. So Shangez is always addressing this unknown American character as you, and by extension I feel the reader is being positioned as that you. So while of course this novel's been read around the world by many diverse individuals, I can't help but wonder if there's an implied audience for this novel, a white, middle-class, North American, who's being implicated by this use of second person, whether it's the reader is being directly addressed by this you. In the opening pages of the novel, Shangez addresses the presumed reader, saying, "How did I know you were American?" he asks. He urges the American not to be frightened by his beard, for he's a lover of America. So what I get the sense that Shangez is trying to comfort a particular reader who from the very start may mistrust him. So what I see this doing is addressing the victim position of the United States from the very start, coaxing the reader to sort of lower their guard, because that's going to allow the novel to challenge the dominant 9/11 rhetoric, this kind of rhetoric that sees the United States police visible minorities and villainize them. So it's also doing this in really coded ways as well. There's a scene in the novel where Shangez is assigned a project, and he has to go assess a book publisher in Chile. So the head of this publishing company is given the name Juan Bautista, or John the Baptist, and this character suggests to Shangez that he visit the home of Pablo Neruda, and also tells him about Janissaries. They were Christian boys, he explained, captured by the Ottomans and trained to be soldiers in a Muslim army, at that time the greatest army in the world. They were ferocious and utterly loyal. They had fought to erase their own civilizations, so they had nothing else to turn to. So not only does this conversation alert Shangez to the fact that he may be deployed as a particular kind of Janissary, but it's also this whole scene is kind of a reference or allusion to another September 11th. This time in 1973 in Chile. This time when the United States are perpetrators of mass violence. So on September 11th, 1973, the Chilean coup d'etat took place. So President Nixon ordered economic warfare, and the US-backed Pinochet were able to overthrow the socialist president Salvador Allende, who is the uncle of the author Isabel Allende. So many have argued that during this event the US engaged in acts of terrorism, resulting in the death of Allende, but also in the deaths of thousands of his supporters who were kidnapped, tortured, and murdered. So what this novel is doing with things like this is reminding me of something that Judith Butler says in Precarious Life, The Powers of Mourning and Violence, where she talks about US imperialism and supremacy and mourning post 9/11. She talks about the way that we begin the narrative right at 9/11, but that if we perhaps started the timeline a little bit earlier, say in 1973 or during Operation Cyclone, when the first Bush administration financed and armed jihad warriors, that perhaps we'd have a way of conceptualizing this violence and using our mourning to productive means, as a way of dismantling things like US imperialism, US supremacy. Butler prompts us to think about ways that we can mourn violence without resulting to the rhetoric of US supremacy or imperialism that actually may perpetuate this type of violence. So I think this novel does really fascinating things, like I said before, such as hailing the reader to think beyond the US-dominated narrative and rhetoric of 9/11 and beyond, and to kind of imagine how it could both be a victim and perpetrator of violence. So if you haven't read it, please do check it out. I think it's really, really great. Definitely worth reading and thinking about. And if you have read it, please let me know down below what you thought. Did you like it? Did you not like it? What were you thinking about when you read it? I'd love to hear. So that's it for me, and I hope that you all have a great life. I'll see you soon. Bye.